It's like an abuser. Someone abused you, okay? But they also cared for you, and you felt love. You felt affection. It gave you good things in life, but it also abused you. It did things that would be ashamed to even explain to the next person that they've done to you. They've harmed you. They made you guilt. They made you have shame. And you're now no longer under that captivity of this abusive relationship that also gave you a lot of things that made you feel comfort and truth and goodness and all that. And you now want to understand it. You really want to psychoanalyze the situation. You want to know the truth about this relationship, this thing, this phenomena that has captivated 2 billion people.
I think one of the bravest things we can do as humans is to look at our beloved community and say, if I'm really honest, I don't entirely agree with you guys, especially when we know it's not going to be welcomed and it's going to cost us a lot. And for those of us who are brave enough to do that, we frequently find that our new community accepts us because we disagree with our old community. So it would take a doubly courageous person to look at the new community and say, actually, guys, since I've been here, I've changed my mind about some things. Which is silly, because the alternative is, since I've been here, I've changed my mind about nothing. And yet, that's usually the safest thing to imply. This is precisely why I'm such a big fan of today's guest, Derek Lambert. He was formally kicked out of his community for saying, I don't agree with you guys on all your points about Jesus. As a Christian exile, he went and made a YouTube channel about mysticism that now has nearly 500,000 subscribers. That's a lot of people to get mad at you when you say, hey guys, if I'm really honest, I think I've changed my mind about some things since I've been here. That's a stupid move if you just care about the numbers on your YouTube channel. But it's the only move you can make if you're a person of integrity. That's the move you have to make if you're Derek Lambert. How long were you in?
In Christianity?
Yeah.
My mom was Christian, so I personally grew up with that environment. Like, mom would say, hey, go to church. She would try to bribe me. She would try to be like, hey, I'll take you to an all-you-can-eat buffet if you go to church. And so very early on, I was already kind of being indoctrinated with it to believe. But I remember having like a conscious commitment, if you will, as a young teenager. So somewhere in between 11 to 13 years of age, probably 11 or 12, is when I would say, like, I had a conscious decision to believe. I'm at a house church. And then in 6th grade, I had a full-blown altar call conversion that happened, and it was a father that would never let me down, is the way that they would, the gospel message, which my dad was an alcoholic, and, that experience really I had that day was a real one. It was amazing. I'll never forget the experience. And I still, to this day, can remember how it felt. I felt like my feet were barely on the ground. I was floating. I had a warm, God hugging me experience. And
so then how do you reflect on that now?
Now, I think I look at it more like, now that I know more about science, now I know more about the natural world and psychology and just how humans are, I do think that this was a bit of a placebo in a sense. Not to say that they're wrong or bad, but I believe that the experience was real. And that's because humans have real experiences and we're conscious beings. But I think if you would have changed any avatar with any other story that was profound and really sold me on that, plus I was already primed, right? So from youth, I'm being told that subconsciously I'm hearing the pastor, consciously hearing him, but he's boring, but subconsciously picking up some of the things along the way, I'm sure. And it just ended up becoming something that I ended up buying into. But any story, and we do it all the time watching movies, where it could be Lord of the Rings. It could be any fiction, any tale at all that has a profound message. And that's how I reflect back on it, is that I'm not going to pretend I didn't have an experience. And Christians tell me all the time, how could you reject Christ after you knew him? You know what I mean? Like, you knew him, and yet, you rejected that experience of communing with him. And I'm like, no, actually, I just now rationalize what I think that was differently. I don't think I was actually talking to Jesus as if Jesus was really hearing me. I think it was me all along. Or these are natural human experiences in certain circumstances with certain messages that I'm receiving a certain way that end up causing people to have these. And if you do any deep research on the phenomenon of human experiences in religious settings, you'll quickly realize you're not unique or special in that regard. You know what I mean?
That's one of the most troubling things for me leaving was like the degree to which the Mormons actually lived out what we said, because we were like, but if you have a real relationship with Jesus, then you'll be converted. You'll know that he's real. And then we moved on to whatever the next points are. Mormons just stop there. They just give you the book. They're like, you know what? I trust. He's going to talk to you, and then they walk away. Like, damn, that's some confidence. Like, we didn't have the guts to do that, But that's like it's the same thing. Like, just the confidence of that experience.
Yeah,
it's a powerful thing.
Very powerful.
So then, when did you get out? Then, or what was your path out?
It was gradual, and it wasn't all at once. And it was, I mean, I had some rough experiences with the church, with different, as we went along, I had different experiences, but the PCA church ends up excommunicating me. I started realizing that Jesus said some things that were supposed to happen back then, and my eschatology changed. And then once I became a heretic within Christianity, and I pretty much thought 99.9% of the church was wrong about their eschatology and stuff, it gets you into a special place where you think you're right. You have the unique special doctrine and understand it better than everyone else. But then I was going through addiction issues, and I think it was when I struggled getting clean and I'm dying, where when you're in that kind of crises, you're able to self-evaluate and ask questions and do things you would never dare. But if you put a dog in the corner, like if you have a dog that doesn't bite, okay, cool. You go, my dog doesn't bite. Does that mean your dog can't bite? No, that means your dog just doesn't. It's not trained to. But if you back a dog into a corner and it feels threatened for its life, it might do things and attack in a way you've never seen. And I feel like the only way I was able to really get to a place where I was willing to think maybe what I believe isn't true and let me at least investigate it, was when I was struggling with addiction, and my life to my beliefs and what I was sincerely believe did not match. And I didn't understand, when I'm begging God for help, how there wasn't some, coercive nature by the Spirit itself to then make me automatically start doing the things I'm praying and asking and begging God to help me get my life in order. And so I try to compartmentalize and cognitive dissonance and all these things. And I end up finally in a place where I'm coming across content that wasn't Christian content that would allow me to think in ways I wasn't willing to think. And the first one was the Zeitgeist conspiracy movie that first initially introduced this idea that Jesus is maybe like all the other gods. I came across it through Ravi Zacharias' Jesus Among Other Gods book, but it was filtered through an apologetic, and it was not really giving an accurate portrait of what the reality of other religious faiths really convey or what they really believe. And just like the Zeitgeist wasn't giving a whole accurate reflection of Jesus and Horus and 12 disciples and 12 this and born on December 20, the whole nine, they overemphasized the parallels and whatnot. It was enough to whet my appetite, though, to go, is there any truth to this? Because I thought maybe it is true. And then I saw debunk videos, right? Debunking Zeitgeist. And I watched those Christian episodes, and I'm like, whew. But there was still a seed of doubt. Still a seed of doubt,
yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, it's funny how relieving when it seems like if you're just searching for the truth, there shouldn't be anything that's relieving, just interesting.
Exactly.
But you can feel that as a Christian of like, okay, cool, I'm secure again. Like, that was a close one. I felt like maybe I was gonna not believe there for a second, but
exactly
back in. That's interesting. That seems like an interesting story, that it was through your addiction or recovery from addiction, because that's the point where you're supposed to come back to Jesus, and that's supposed to be part of your testimony.
Yeah.
But in your case, that was like...
It's complicated because I'm going to 12-step meetings at Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. I abused alcohol. Whether or not you want to say there's some science behind a disease of addiction and all that, I don't know. I mean, I've seen people go, we've used that title, but like in reality, there's some, who knows? But when you're at Alcoholics Anonymous, part of their teaching is that you have a higher power of your own understanding. And I'm in a room full of people I relate to, I connect with. So something psychological happens in those rooms, in my opinion, that gives you more flexibility to other people's beliefs while simultaneously using the name God to mean whatever the hell that means. And there's something that you go, well, damn. I mean, it works for them. So, like, how did they have another God of their own understanding that isn't the God of my understanding, that may not be the God of his understanding or her understanding or their understanding? And yet, they're getting sober, they're getting clean, their life is showing a better improvement. Something's up, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that in the back of my mind was part of the game too, is seeing that, like, that, and there's much, I'm a big analytical thinker too. Like, I love to study and learn. And I think that played a part somewhere along the way, even though I wasn't consciously maybe thinking it in like any specific meeting going, it all clicked just now and at 12 p.m. and this day. It's like somewhere along the journey of me reflecting and thinking and analyzing and all, that it all really started to make me question, why is my one true and theirs is all wrong? No, that shit stopped working any longer, especially when I saw the real world implications of make your own higher power. And they talk about a doorknob sometimes in the meetings, and it's like, a doorknob? And yeah, some of you might just, have God, G-O-D, group of drunks as your higher power. And so I started using that when I became an atheist and went back to get my 5-year chip. I went in there and I spoke like the rest of them. And I said, my God is a group of drunks, G-O-D. And, and just picked up my 5-year chip, and they were like, man, that's so powerful. Your story was so great. And I'm like, they don't even know I don't believe in a God. But, like, if you go by the definition of what we mean by God typically is, as described in all these materials that we've read from these ancient texts. But if you mean there's something out there, well, shit, if nature's all there is, then nature's God. Okay, then I guess I believe in God. If you really demand that I use the term God, I'll use God. All right, whatever. At some point, I'm going to just give up and just say something is definitely here and we exist, and therefore that's God, I guess. Okay, whatever.
I feel like that's devastating for so many when you realize that all the things that God is useful for, all the gods are equally useful for.
Exactly.
And all the things that you need God to specifically do. God, I actually need power to do this. I actually need you to bring this into my life. Anything that is outside of like the hope that God brings, that every God brings, all of those things don't exist. It's like you can only do the things that all the other gods can do. I feel like we're back in an Old Testament story now.
Exactly.
It's God competing against everybody else. And it's always a head-to-head race. So then you said your dad was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Is he still alive?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a relationship with him?
Yeah, I absolutely do. He just came back. He came to visit for 3 weeks and then left a couple weeks back.
Yeah. Are both he and your mom believers still?
I believe so. My dad's much more flimsy and flexible, but still believes, like it almost comes default for him. I think my mom is a believer, yes, and she still fears hell, and I have to tell her all the time. I'm like, you're not going to hell, even in your worldview. You're fine. You're going to heaven. Don't worry. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, man. Okay, so then, but she is, of course, actively worried about your soul. I'm guessing.
I'm sure she worries about her own more than anything, it seems, and like, and one time she asked me, why don't you believe? And I knew I could not talk about Jesus, because if I did, her brain would not understand, or she would immediately get defensive and cognitive dissonance or whatever. So I said, well, let me tell you a story. And then I tell her the story of Odysseus and the Trojans, and then, his journey home to Ithaca. And I give a little narrative pointing out he was in bed, sleeping with his wife, making love to her. And then the war call, they got to go to battle. They go to war. And the reason I told this is because my dad was a retired Green Beret in the Special Forces. So he has been through combat situations and deployed all the time. So she could relate to the story, a pagan story at that. And I gave the story and wrap up the story. I mean, I don't want to do it all here, but she's crying because it's deep. It's powerful. It's mythical, and yet it has a realness to it. It's got verisimilitude. It's got some depth. And she is crying, and she's like, really like tears running down her face. And I says, that was the Bible for Greeks for so long. And you have your Bible. I said, which one's true? Almost like the Life of Pi kind of thing at the end, where it's like, it's not identical to it, but at the end of the movie of the Life of Pi, which I love so much, he tells the story of the animals the whole time. Spoiler alert, of course. And then the Chinese who owned the ship say, we need the real answer. That's not going to work when we get back to our bosses. We need to know why this ship sank or what happened. He goes, okay, the cook, my mom, we're all on the boat. And then he gives the real human story of cannibalism. And then at the end, you could see the tears of the guy who's reporting this, taking the story from Pi. And he goes, which one do you believe actually happened? And he's like, well, that one. And he's like, okay. And he goes,
so which story do you prefer?
And he's like,
the one with the tiger. That's the better story.
And he goes,
and so it goes with God.
And one may not be true, but you prefer, right? And that was his kind of point, and it's deep. But then there was this moment where I kind of, in that story, wanted to say to Mom, you felt every bit of that, what I just told you. You really, really cried and knew what I was saying and got it. That experience is what you got when we heard about Jesus dying for us and to save us, as we're told in our story. And I just wanted to point out the power of the myth in both has truth value, has power, is strong, and there's a lesson there. And you could see why someone would want to maybe believe in that story. And she really then, I think, got it and was like, okay, no more. She didn't want to go any deeper. She's like, okay, all right. But she still liked the story. It hit because it taps into all those human experiences that I think Darren Brown, the famous mentalist and magician, constantly talks about when he converts an atheist on video and all that. It shows that there are real connections with family, friends, loved ones, sister, mother, brother, whatever. And those experiences we have connected to real things, it's just a leap. It's just a slight leap to connect them to stories that we aren't actually connected to and we think we're connected to. And so the brain does a leap of, the rustling in the bush that's a lion isn't really a lion, but we believe it's a lion. And now we think lions are out to get us. It keeps us alive. But our brains do that even with myth, even with stories. And I think that's what's happening.
Well, I think it's because we think that our rationality is something different than intuition. I think that they're the same thing. Like when you see one apple and then another apple and then you count them up and it's two, we feel like that's a rational process. Like there's some calculator going on. But yeah. I think that's an emotional reaction of just yes, this is solid. I feel that. And I don't think we can distinguish necessarily nearly as well as we think we can between something feeling true and something making sense. Mm-hmm. So then when we get a story that if it feels real enough, it's believable. It's real.
I think so too. I mean, it's part of our evolution. I mean, think about it, man. I'll give you two examples. So I am no longer a believer, right? And one day I'm I can't remember if I'm on the porch or if I'm trying to get inside or what was going on. And a thunderclap happened. Just an absolute monstrous sound. I mean, the essence of my being shit its pants, okay? I'm talking everything in me went into fight or flight instantly. I felt something way beyond me. It was almost just totally intuitive that was, I could see why someone would go, that thing, there's some God or something way bigger than this little thing that I am. And that scared me so much right then and there. It was so loud, so powerful, and the lightning was nearby that I naturally, even though I'm now an atheist, intuitively and immediately thought of something oh my God, bro, it was so beyond me. And there's been anthropologists, I believe they're or primatologists, I believe, in Africa who've been studying chimpanzees, and a thunderclap happens, and the chimp like one of the pack, puts their fist up to the sky when the lightning strikes because they think some agency is there is trying to get them, and they believe it's a thing. And our minds make sense that there's an agent, but it's not just humans. We're talking our primate ancestors. We're talking about mammal ancestors before primates. I mean, like, imagine going back in the natural world was enough to make you think something is more, something, that thing is another thing. Like, I'm a thing, but it's trying to get me type of thing. And so I think that there's a lot deeper into why we believe, and that's why I disagree with a lot of atheists that we're born atheist. I mean, sure, we're born without the name of a something and we're born without the narrative of the something, but like instinctually, I think we're not only primed and wired and genetically, neurologically set up in order to fall prey to the superstitious and fall prey into that camp. What we have done by deconstructing that is the most difficult thing I think what a human can do is figuring out how I see the code. I see the matrix in a sense. Now, I don't really see the matrix. It's a metaphor because I may have exited Plato's cave and saw the sun and thought, wow, that's real reality. But who knows? I might just be looking at another illusion for all I know. That's okay. That's okay. My illusion's better than the shadows on the wall now. But truth is, like, I think that there's a lot of science behind realizing, you know, that we're wired for this very thing. And to survive, that's what helped us survive, which is why I agree with you that I don't think our combat should be self-destruction of all religious belief. We evolved with these things, and I don't think overnight they need to go away. And that's why I had, when Brittany in my recent interview tried to press me on this and went, do you think we should get rid of this, any magical thinking? And I'm like, I don't think it needs to happen like that. I think everything with time and gradual gradation and evolution, and because you don't want to make a massive leap and we took the wrong step and then extinction or something. You just never know. Like, you never know.
Well, and I don't think that we can anyway. Like, even if you wanted to, like, I think we just gotta keep on redeveloping this thing because it's so obviously true that that there's something experientially when I look at my kids, like there is something there experientially. Now, I don't think that there actually is. It's chemicals in my brain, but it feels like there's this love thing that exists outside of me.
I don't live thinking chemicals in my brain, even if I rationalize that it's chemicals in my brain. And I think we need to be better as skeptics, as people who've left and going, you really want to live your life going, oh, well, all that is the protons and neutrons that connected with the da-da-da-da-da. It don't feel like that's all that is. I don't care if that is all that is. If that is all that is, cool, dude. Good story. Great. I saw what the facts of science are rolling out. But my brain has experienced, and my consciousness has relayed this in narrative form for me. It's taken shortcuts and it's found ways to make that compute in a way that is profound, and the utility of that. Why are we not capitalizing on the utility of that and just replacing those things with less harmful examples and better ways to equip our brains instead of the old, you need a guy's blood on a cross to drip off the wood for you to have your sins atoned for, or an animal. Okay, that clearly is archaic and horrific, I think, in many ways, if you want to look at it that way. It's also beautiful and tragic in many ways. What lens do you want to look through? You want to look through the poetic, artistic, mythic lens and go, oh, wow, if a man who's in a tragic situation with his family, the car goes off the bridge into the water, he comes up, gets some air, his family's trapped in that car, he goes down, boom, breaks out the glass, brings his children up, boom, goes down, breaks out the glass, brings his wife up. She's unconscious. He gets her float. She just barely coughs up the water. He goes back for the last child, but he can't get the child out of the seatbelt. He spends every last moment, pulls the child out of the window and goes unconscious under the water, drowns to death, dies. But his child, he pulls out the window, had enough oxygen in their lungs that they actually floated up to the top and they were saved. And the story is that the father died in the process, laying down his life to try and save and rescue his children and his wife. Now, That's powerful. I just made that up right now, but I'm saying that's powerful, and we would remember that person as a hero. Now, we can overanalyze this and say, well, the reason he went off of the edge, you know what I'm saying? Now we can go, he was drinking. Or like we could find some shit and be like, dude, that's horrible. Like, don't you realize that the origin of this, he needed to die because of a fruit? And this God he knew there was a snake who's going to enter the shit. You know, like we can get down into that and see the flaws. But then we could say in that moment, you know, there's something beautiful in the moment. There's something ugly in the grand scheme of it, or in other moments there's something ugly. Like, you see what I'm doing, and that's what I'm able to do that I couldn't do as a believer.
I personally think that both of those are equally evolved traits. The staying in it, obviously, for the continuity of narrative, and for let's say the happy life or something like that. Like there's some experience that you have in knowing that you're the one true religion, and like there's something sparkly about that. But then also we need to make progress here. So someone needs to be like, yeah, that's bullshit. We're gonna actually study real things over here. In the same way that, like, even though I'm going to live as if I love my kids, and I'm going to live as if, and sorry for all the atheists that get angry at that sentence, I'm going to live as if there's something magical going on between me and my kids.
Yeah.
And I can't help but do that. I'm going to live out that life. And also, I hope there are a bunch of, like, weirdo neurologists that are either like severely autistic or they're psychopaths, or they just love the science or whatever it is that's in their brain that they're like, love, what's that? That's weird. No, what's happening here is, and I want them to do all of their work so that I can live my life of ignorance over here. And we can also have to keep developing our science and making progress. So I feel like if you only had the religious, that would be evolutionarily detrimental. If you only had the scientific, or whatever you want to call this, I don't mean to pit religion against science, but, you know, whatever. You only had these people over here, that would be evolutionarily detrimental. But the community of those, I think, is another evolved trait, which is why I think we have things that shouldn't exist, like psychopaths and gay people and like other things that are like detrimental to your own procreation. Because we need the diversity, and that sounds, you know, woo woo or whatever. But like, I think we legitimately need the diversity in order for our community to keep on trudging forward.
Yeah, and I like the way you put the idea there, because look, I was in a recent tragic situation myself, and where I felt like I was going to die, and I don't know what's wrong with me. And I'm thinking, man, I want someone who's looking at protons, neutrons, and chemical compounds and all that, and placebo, to be able to break the code, look at the matrix, see it, read it. Okay, boom, let's solve this problem in the material world so that we can have solutions. And yet, I think there needs to be the poetic, there needs to be the artistic, there needs to be the mythic, there needs to be the narrative that we can tell ourselves, because that's how we look at things. We don't just look at the color red and then break down the color red in just scientific terms. We see red and it has signals and it has meaning and it has value immediately. We don't even realize we're doing it, and we're doing it. The colors of this can of sparkling water that I've been drinking out of since doing this discussion with you, I mean, we have so much meaning imbued in interpretation in the world. To try and unravel that, to come up with a whole new language that is purely based on science and devoid of any of the tradition that we've handed ourselves down as our ancestors have survived, I think is silly. So we got to work with it. But I think the way you also put that is like, it reminds me of Carl Sagan, because how do we get the specialness to stay and yet the universality among humans to remain? And is that telling a cosmic story? Is that a story that says all humans are unique and special? We evolved on this planet like Carl Sagan would do. And he had a powerful way of doing that to get people interested in science, but he did it in a storytelling, mythic way that Neil deGrasse Tyson does, for example, where you are stardust. You are special. You're made of something very unique and special in this universe. I think that needs to happen. And if we're, you know, maybe we can hijack those things and figure out a way to take the old traditions, spin them into new ways in which we've now told ourselves new myths, where we're comfortable enough where we're not trying to defend from those modern ones, and we're able to accept them, but they break down the boundaries, I think, that make people who live different lifestyles from us enemies or deficient, evil. Like, are you kidding? No. And I was guilty of it, like in our religious upbringing. I believed there was something deficient and abhorrent with same-sex relationships or, transgender or any of that. Like, all of that was just clearly evil and clearly immoral according to my God. And at the end of the day, I now realize I'm like, no, actually, these just seem to be different subjective experiences that humans are having in their relationship to one another and how they're experiencing things in this world. Is just different than what my experience has been, and it's no longer a taboo based on a God or a doctrine or anything like that. I can look at this and go, wow, they do love each other. In whatever way love is for them in their experience, they have love and they love each other. The same way I love my wife or my children or whatever, they have love for their partners and stuff. And I think when we have that tension and those dogmas are there, it not only creates us versus them, but I think it can cause people who are in those categories to feel like they're under attack and they feel like they can't just be themselves. And now you've created enemies, and they feel like they're being persecuted, which they are a lot of cases. But, man, it goes down a whole rabbit trail of like why I think everyone needs to deconstruct. Everyone needs to deconvert from the toxicity of their prior or their child faith and then renegotiate wherever they want to go from there. And I don't want to tell people what that renegotiation is. I don't want to tell people you need to be like me and try to look at the code. As Britt says, that code, she scared the shit out of me, man. She scared me, and she says, in this one episode she does on TikTok where evolution itself seems to want to cull out those who are looking at the code and not want to reproduce and whatnot. It gives advantageous evolutionary advantages to those who do have religion and do believe and do follow down that path. And it's kind of scary. I don't want everyone to have to go down that path. If you found like, hey, abracadabra, I still think there's some magical thing out there, but it's not this. And it doesn't have dogmas and it doesn't have this demand and it's not looking for blood for atonement or it's not got a hell place you can go to. And you found a magical world that you can believe in, really kind of like entering into the Lord of the Rings, bro. Like, do you know how bad I wish there was a real kingdom where Frodo's like, the Frodo kind of people live and there's like elves and all that. I wish that was kind of real in a way and it's magical. I don't think I don't know how to enter back into the world of magic in a sense, where it's not going to harm me and I'm doing good, I think, but I kind of wish it was true.
Yeah, well, and I think the next evolution, like if I have to fast forward 100 years and we don't kill ourselves, and assuming Christianity remains, because it should have died. Like it's been predicted that it was going to die for as long as it's been here. So it shouldn't have made it this long. I'm going to assume in 100 years it's still around. I think the dogma that needs to be there is the dogma that polices internally as opposed to externally. So if you want to, like, if your God tells you that, you're not supposed to be gay or that you're not supposed to it seems like it's always sex stuff,
yeah,
but you're not supposed to eat pork, whatever it is, as long as it polices internally and not externally, I think I'm actually in favor of that. I want people to test that out. Like, what happens to a person if they never eat pork? Like, I wish I had that collection of people. We could run tests on them. What would we learn from people who never ever eat pork? I want those people to exist. So maybe I want a group where God tells them that, or test out all the different things. I don't want to have to test it out. I think pork is great, but I want those communities to exist. So I'm not in favor of like, well, your dogma is not right, so we're gonna get rid of your group. Like, I just want your dogma to police internally and not externally.
Yeah.
As long as it can do that, I feel like that's a pretty safe Christianity. There's going to be some abuses in there. I don't know how you get rid of abuses entirely, but it's the external stuff that feels like it's troublesome.
I would like to see, what you're describing, except Christians come to realize that these aren't magical divine revelations that are unchangeable. Because a little bit of science, a little bit of modern empathy and experience would tell us that a man with a man is not a problem. That's why I think a lot of progressive Christians will interpret passages like Romans 1 as pederasty or something, or find a way to go, well, no, this, he's not talking about that. He'd be okay with this as if we know what Paul would be okay with. Like,
Yes.
but like, it's like they're trying to justify or rationalize or try to explain and keep their text intact as if Paul really was on a right path all along with his ideas. And it's like, I just think divine revelation forces you to go backwards instead of being able to really move forward with the thought. Often, I'm not going to say there aren't some who interpret it in different ways, but it doesn't seem to be the majority in a lot of the Christian circles that we live in here in America, how they view this. And I think once we realize that there's not really any harm, that what's the worst that you can do is not reproduce, right? At the end of the day. And I know I hear all these people talk about we're behind on all these reproductive, like look at China's got so many, or India or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, like, has anyone thought about the food problem? I mean, really, like how many humans on Earth can we really sustain to have food on this level? And that's another science question we need to have. But like, so many starve right now and are dying of starvation all across the planet. And I'm just thinking to myself, you're one more mouth to feed. And you have to like weigh these pros and cons and think about this is like, is nature itself telling us like, hey, we're naturally evolving to become the things we're becoming to help us try to be fit and survive in the environments that we're currently in. What if nature is running the course here and we don't realize it? And your religion is still trying to hold on to an idea that might have worked back then in an evolutionary sense. Let's speak like as if there's a mind to evolution, which I don't think there is, but let's just suppose there was a mind to it. Your revelation might be fighting against much of what nature's trying to push for. So there's this like conflict that's happening here. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Plus, they could adopt children for many of those who are having kids that don't want to raise them or can't. Well, now we can have them raise these children and give them a life worth living in. And anyway, there's just so much, man. I don't know the answer to these questions. I'm just throwing out ideas that when it's harming these people, I do see that as a problem. That is something I feel confident in, is that, you're attacking individuals with your faith. And if your internal, like you were describing, bubble is wanting to critique, but that internal bubble says this behavior is wicked and abominable, we've got issues where, that poor person who has to lie to everyone in their congregation and hide it and can't identify for who they are. You see what I'm saying? Like that becomes problematic.
I mean, that's not just a religious problem though, too. Like if you join an MLM or like you do CrossFit or like everyone in our group is doing it the right way and everybody else is doing it the wrong way. And if you want to be one of us, you gotta do our thing our way. Just trying to get those borders to be a little bit fuzzier. Like CrossFit is a great way to get in shape unless you find another way to get in shape. And if you could get CrossFit to like take that attitude, like it might be one of the best workout programs that there is, because like there's a lot of different ways. And that I agree with you. The belief in the lack of acknowledgement that your myth is a myth is the problem. And so in the same way that like, I guess if you stop believing in Santa and then you're like, so we got to get rid of Christmas. Like, wait a second, I'm having fun here. Like, let's sing the Santa songs. We just need to know that it's also a story.
No doubt.
And then we can get all the benefits of the myth. If we pretend, if we act as if, and I feel like that's the benefit of religious beliefs. It just skips the step of as if. It just believes. But if you believe as if, we've got, like you're talking about heuristics throughout our life. My favorite one is like you tell a Little League player or a golfer or tennis player, anybody, you got to follow through. Like after you don't just hit the ball, like hit it and like follow through. Well, that's stupid. Like nothing you do after you hit the ball actually affects the ball. But if you believe that what you do after the ball hits the ball matters to the ball, then you're going to hit the ball a lot better. I just feel like having those, like we all know it doesn't really affect it, but we're not going to get the benefits unless we live as if it's true.
Right.
I think that's where religion needs to go, but I don't know. I think evolution will tell us where it needs to go because that's where it will go.
Or we go extinct.
Yeah, right. Do you think that people like you or me exist in 50 or 100 years. Like, I feel like the internet has to kill the Bible. It killed Scientology. It killed Mormonism. I feel like we're kind of at like I feel like I'm the last person to deconvert. Like, surely everyone else has realized this stuff, and that like I'm shocked to find true believers of inerrancy and univocality in the Bible. Is it going away?
I mean, there's no way to predict for sure, I don't think, of knowing whether or not there's going to be a revival of sorts. I mean, humans are wired, like we said. The wiring is there. That wiring, it would take who knows how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands to try and unwire through evolution these kind of tendencies. So um, I don't know if we'll default back to some of the more radical forms of our religious upbringing. You know what I mean? I feel like more education might help, though. But
Believing that the Bible is inerrant and that it has no contradictions, do you think that can last the test of time?
let me put it this way, okay? And I don't want to get political, but I think it's important because it's another wing of people's kind of cultic, tribalistic, approach. America is the good guy, and we've always been the good guy, and we will always be the good guy. And then if someone points to a certain war or Vietnam War or points to a certain thing that America does, and you go, yeah, but like eventually everyone's going to know the history of what's happened, right? And what we've really done, right? And you go, well, we're all getting educated and we're all learning, but it's like there are people who are so patriotically driven and delusionally willing to ignore maybe some of the bad things we have done as a nation, that we haven't done any wrong and that we've always and only been the good guy. That narrative may or may not remain unless America somehow outside of its control ended up ceasing to be America. And then people can outside of the bubble be willing to look at it and go, okay, hold on. Maybe America's done some wrong in the world and we're not perfect. Um, there's no way for me to predict it. I want to use it as an example because I know some friends, I know some family members who kind of view America as this perfect thing. But then I also know some who think we do all the wrong and all evils in the world are caused by us. And so, when you evaluate it like that, you have to kind of think, will people within that bubble who have that belief, which I know there are many, and many revivals are currently happening, especially under this administration, tying it with the political and the religious here. Are we rekindling that wiring I was saying we still have, and apologists are doubling down and finding new ways to renegotiate with the inerrancy argument and going, listen, it's still inspired. Does that mean there aren't a few errors here and there? Sure, there are a few errors here and there, and they're willing to go there now, but they're still pushing the same shtick, apart from there's a couple contradictions, a couple minor human errors, but the message is inerrant. The message is inerrant. How do you falsify that the message is inerrant? You can't falsify it. If they really want to make it make sense that way, they will. As Bart Ehrman says all the time, if you want to make a contradiction not a contradiction, if you try hard enough, you can. And a contradiction stops being a contradiction. So I don't know how to predict this. I mean, the reason why I don't know how to predict this is Christianity mutated quite well. Okay, look at it like an organism. These cults are organisms, and they found a way to camouflage into the environments that they ended up in. In early Christianity, when it moved east, Manichaeism was on the rise, a blend between Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy, and Christianity became Manichaeism style Buddhist-ish Christianity. When you go down south into Alexandria, Egypt, you find mystery cult, very Gnostic-y style Christianities, where archons and the daemons and various forms of philosophical thought. When you go to Rome, you have these proto-Catholicizing forms of Christianity that look very much like the prior Roman religion, but you change the decals and make it Christian, and Mary and saints and such that take place of the 12 Olympians and the various forms of the Roman religion, and that gets brought in there, even to the Vestal Virgin. I mean, all of that stuff is literally just kind of being replaced. And Christianity does a damn good job of camouflaging into the next new environmental, cultural phenomena of the region and the locale. And so that's why I say right now you've got in America certain forms of Christianity, and then you have the opposite forms that are more liberal and progressive. And like it's going to fit and find its way to evolve with the new thing. And that's why I don't know what to do with what you just said, because humans can revolt back to caveman style, sticks and stones and killing each other at any moment. And with that can come radical fundamentalist forms of the religion. And I don't know if those radicalist forms of religion we will evolve out of as long as we're literally dropping bombs on each other or causing famine and lack of education in regions of the world that just barely have enough, resources to eat or whatever. I don't know what to do with this question, Jamin, because I don't know the future and I can't say what humans might do,
Okay, so then what advice do you think you would give to Christianity then?
I know it's asking them to do something that most of the time they don't do. I think that, but because it's not going to help their cause. Here's the problem. I want them to teach what they actually learned in seminary. I want them to actually tell their audiences, these are the problems without all the apologetics. And by doing that, you're going to have members leave because what keeps it special is the myth or the lie. And I'm using myth to be lie here, not myth as in truth, but the myth as in the lie, that there aren't errors, that there aren't contradictions, that there aren't problems with these texts because they've already been telling them that there aren't. And so once they find out that, they feel like they're lied to, they feel like they got to leave. So I don't know how to solve this problem and this conundrum, if you will, that they've kind of placed in their own storytelling of how they give their members of the church these ideas. I would love to see the Christianity evolve out of that and go, listen, this is our tradition and it's going nowhere. These are not dogmas anymore. These are stories. These are, very deeply truth traditions that we have that give us meaning and value and cultural significance. And our ancestors did this. Like we want to carry this on and carry it forward. But we know some things now. We know better than we did before. Let's do better. And if we could get the humans in the pews to stick around and, not feel like, well, we've been lied to and you're lying to us, then maybe something can go where Christianity can enter into that world, and some forms of it are, but it doesn't seem like the mass amount of it is, at least not in America. You go to Europe, they compartmentalize their religion. They're not like wearing it on their sleeve in the same way that we do in America. So it just depends on where you go at and who you talk to. But I don't know what kind of advice I could give the churches, because my advice would be giving them the real facts of what the data seems to suggest based on critical scholarship, because they learned that in seminary, but then finding a way to say, look, we don't need to be dogmatist here. There's something still of value in what we're talking about. And we may reinterpret some of this stuff. Every generation has. Every Christian movement has. Every single church you go back, every father has different ways that they would interpret some of these stories. We're no different. We're just in a new context. You know what I mean?
I feel like there's a massive audience for that. Like everyone who's leaving Christianity is looking for a non-Christian Christianity. And I feel like they're all afraid to do something that looks too much like church, but they all want the effects of something that looks and feels like church.
Yeah.
So I agree that like that if you could just take a church and convert it into that, it would lack all of the awkwardness of like the people who've left the church. Like you see all of, like the atheist groups and stuff like that, and they're all like, but we can't do that because that's what the church does and we're not a church. And it's like, no, you got to do that because that's what makes the feeling. Like that's the thing. But then just being honest, like you're saying, yeah, that's a tough one because I don't see any atheist group that want to make that, even though that's what I feel like there's a desire for. And yet I feel like the church is too stuck on their stuff that it's just going to slowly leak out of the little hole. They're all going to drain out and then it goes away and you could convert it and like actually do something good. But it's a hard thing to do, to admit that you were wrong.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. There's so much there, man.
That's actually a big part of what I wanted to talk to you about originally, because the channel is If I'm Really Honest.
Yeah.
And so it's all about like, what have you learned that you would have been ashamed to admit before, or that that your community doesn't want you to admit. One of the things that I was wanting to talk to you about was like your view on mythicism and like what's changed and what things, like, if you're really honest, is kind of uncomfortable to admit, but here's the way I've changed, or here's what seems right that my community might not like.
If I'm really honest, I'm going to do that. I'm going to use that slogan as I go forward here because I don't know if Jesus existed. Okay. If I'm really honest, I don't know. And I was a believer that he really existed. He was God in the flesh, deconverted, and came to this position. He didn't exist, and that he's a completely mythical dude, never existed. He was made up and would interview different people with different perspectives for how and why he was made up, from non-academic people to more academic sources like Richard Carrier and Robert Price.
Let me ask you real quick.
Yeah.
When you were in that spot,
Mhm.
did you feel evangelical about that? Like, people need to know he wasn't real.
Well, I did, because there are a lot of true things that I recognize that are true about Christianity, about Jesus, that mythicists are right about. Okay. So once you see those truths, you feel like we've been lied to all along. There's a bit of evangelist in you to saying, you need to know that we've been lied to about this, right? And I still feel that way about some things, that people really, if they want to know, warning, click on this video, you're going to find out, you're going to hear something. If you've never heard it, you're going to be like, what? No way. And trust me, the comments on all my videos reflect the what? No way. The complete, you don't know what you're talking about, Satan, everything under the sun, right? To dismiss or excuse what I'm saying. So I definitely still had the evangelical in me, but toward something that we're not taught in school, in church. We're not told these things. And it's a bit scandalous because you go from this guy who's God, who created the universe, who came into the flesh, right? He is the maker, to this guy never even existed, and this isn't true at all. So, like, it's a mind-blowing experience that you go through when you do that, when you pendulum swing. Two, you almost feel like the pendulum is going to swing back to the middle, right? You're like, oh, well, let me get to the middle where the reality is. And there's a bit of swing back, but I can't go back to the middle. The middle is kind of granting that there's this mystique, that there really is, like, partially the legend is real, partially the myth is somewhat there, and but the myth and legend actually happened. Like, there's real truth to him having powers and doing these things. But then there's also some made up. No. That's meeting in the middle. I'm still, like, in the camp of the mythicist, in the sense that the character Jesus that we see, that guy is a literary work of art by an author who had intentions of his own on why he wrote Jesus to look and behave and do these things this way. And come to find out, that's not a mythicist idea. That's just a critical scholarly idea. It's not like you have to be a mythicist to have that view. So I found out that in that issue of, like, this side of things that I think are realistic, you have this dispute. Was there a guy at all behind it all? Or was the guy built from the ground up totally as mythology? He did not exist. Even the human guy is constructed in the Gospels. And that's where I think the real debate lies between academics. And most scholars think there was a guy. And their evidence for doing so, I think, is convincing that there was probably a guy. But if I'm being really honest, every piece of evidence that they present that could persuade you there was a guy is explainable. And it's not even, like, ad hoc necessarily explainable for the narrative. And all you have to do is a little heuristics, the term you used earlier, to other cults that are contemporaneous and how they believed in what they believed in. For example, one of the big ones is They would never believe a Jewish man, a Messiah at that, would have been crucified in the most gruesome, ugly way in Rome by the Romans. Not in Rome, but in Jerusalem, but by the Romans. And of course, it depends on which gospel you read, next to Lactai, these robbers, bandits, and whatnot, and he's kind of being equated among them. So they would never create a story that would have that as the central myth. Like, they would not make that up. That's insane, right? But then you just flip the page over to Attis, another mystery cult that was actually in the 50s AD, around the time Paul's writing his letters, under Claudius. He implemented the Hilaria Festival. For those who don't know what the Hilaria Festival is, it is the celebration of the death and the rebirth, the resurrection of Attis. And this happened Easter, March 25th, every year they would celebrate. And in the 50s, Claudius implemented this all Roman-wide, right? Like this was a famous festival. He dies on March 25th, and by March 28th, he resurrects from the dead. He's alive again from the dead. In the central myth of Attis, you have a young man, a beautiful young man, like Adonis, like the other forms of Greek myth, who has a relationship with this goddess. And the goddess finds out that he had been unfaithful. So she makes him driven mad. She makes him go crazy, literally crazy, to the point where he is in front of a tree, a pine tree, in the woods, and he castrates himself and dies. Just like, the Adonis myth has a boar, kill Attis, or not Attis, Adonis, and Adonis dies from a boar who rams him and he bleeds out to death in the woods. Well, Attis castrates, cuts off his testicles, and bleeds to death in front of a pine tree. This is celebrated as the most popular and famous celebratory feast and celebration in the Attis myth. A dude cuts his junk off and bleeds to death in front of a pine tree. And they would celebrate it and put an effigy of him on a pine tree and carry him into Rome and celebrate him. And they would bury him in this tree. And then he would be resurrected on the third day. They would even flagellate themselves, cut themselves, make themselves bleed, go into like a hysterical delusion and mourning. And then on the third day would be celebrations. And they would be so happy he's alive again. Right there at the time of Easter. The same time that Passover happens, just so happens to when Jesus just so happens to appear in Jerusalem and ends up getting captured and ends up dying on a tree, as Acts puts it. Cursed is any man who dies on a tree, right? He's on a tree, becomes a curse. He is literally like the atoning animal sacrifice that the ancient Jews would have. And you kind of have to go like, is it really elite? Is it really elite to think that they could have constructed this story when they had myths that were like this in the Greco-Roman world all around them, centuries prior to Christianity and centuries after Christianity? And then you get Justin Martyr talking about, we believe nothing different from what you believe about the sons of God. And then he mentions the various gods. And so you have to say, it's got to be on the table, but historicists mostly think this criterion of embarrassment is so embarrassment it's not even likely. And I think that's wrong. Do I think that this guy maybe gets crucified and then they maybe put his story to the time of Passover? Maybe. I don't even know when Jesus was really killed or when he was really crucified. I don't know. I don't know what we can know about the guy. Most of the scholars I talk to, Paula Fredrickson, Bart Ehrman, these guys, they say, or these guys and gals, they say it's pretty much bona fide historical fact that he got himself crucified. And that it's a fact, this shouldn't even be disputed, that it's practically certain. And that's because Paul talks about him being crucified. And I tend to agree with that, actually. I do. But when exactly was he crucified? Where was he crucified? These are all up for grabs for me now. And I do think that Paul talking about him being crucified, I know mythicists say it's in outer space. I don't see that for me. being as convincing as Mark just carrying on a tradition that, he's using Paul's letters, scholars seem to agree with, and he narrates Jesus as an actual guy who gets himself killed by Rome, when we know Romans did this by Philo of Alexandria, Josephus, and various historical records tell us that Jews did. We have archaeology that shows ankle bones with nails through them and such. So it isn't a matter of ridiculous proposition to think that he was crucified. Many men were, many Jewish men were, maybe he was. And I think that's more likely than maybe he didn't. That's all I'm saying. And I get a lot of mythicist hell for that. In fact, they think I'm a turncoat, many of them. Not all. Many of them are mythicist friends of mine who love me, and they know that I have a good heart. They know that I want, to really just get this question and debate out there. But many of them are as certain as the fundamentalist that I see that I'm engaging. And I'm like, it ain't that easy, bucko. Take a chill pill for a second. You don't understand how complex, how difficult to navigate this is, and to be so confident in either direction. You should not be that, and I'm not that. I just think it was more likely there probably was. Notice my face, probably. And maybe we get more data that helps clarify that question to solve this big problem, because the evidence is not great, if I'm being really honest.
So then, as a guy who's been on both sides, or maybe all three sides of this, for you, I'm wondering, I can't get myself to care about the question, where is the I understand the passion for like a Christian, like a true believer, like first version of Derek. I understand why he cares very much. As far as the atheist, I can't imagine caring. Where do you think the passion comes from on both sides of that?
I tried to use this analogy before for that question, and I'd almost want to say it's a bad analogy, no matter what I'm going to use here, but it's like an abuser. Someone abused you, okay? But they also cared for you, and you felt love, you felt affection. It gave you good things in life, but it also abused you. It did things that you would be ashamed to even explain to the next person that they've done to you. They've harmed you. They made you guilt. They made you have shame. And you're now no longer under that captivity of this abusive relationship that also gave you a lot of things that made you feel comfort and truth and goodness and all that. And you now want to understand it. You really want to psychoanalyze the situation. You want to know the truth about this relationship, this thing, this phenomena that has captivated 2 billion people. Because if I get a lot of people go, well, leave it alone. You're not a Christian anymore. And it usually comes from Christians, by the way, who say, give it a break. Give it a break. You don't believe it anymore. Why are you so passionate? Why do you even do this at all? And I'm like, well, 2 billion people just so happen to believe in this thing. And a lot of them in the United States really want to take over and make laws and, make a huge change in the real world. And I would be lying to myself if I'm not fascinated with history, fascinated with the answer of what is the truth still. That may be a vestigial from the beliefs I came from, which told me the truth will set you free. And if you just search, there's nothing to be afraid of. You need to know the answer. And so contrary to the philosophy that it taught me about searching for the truth, that the truth just so happened to not be the conclusion of that religion itself, that I am still passionately driven and instilled with that idea in my mind that I want to understand truth as fact here, okay? I don't mean it in some esoteric way, but as in, what is the reality of the thing? And I am blown away. I mean, like I said, something happened when I realized he may not even existed. Holy, if there's a conspiracy theory in the world, it's that there's a chance the guy that 2 billion people follow and believe existed may not even have existed. I don't know how that wouldn't fascinate someone who's so close to it, who's so deeply invested in apologetics as a Christian, then comes out and goes, you mean I might be wrong about everything that I thought about this in that sense? And so I think there's something of a fascination there, but I must admit, too, if I'm being really honest, I've grown a little weary of the question after 8 years of doing it to a point where I don't have the fascination with the question any longer. I'm only conveying it for you to understand I'm a very passionate person and I'm expressing my journey and where I'm at with it, but I'm only writing a script right now so that eight years of my experience on MythVision from this moment is expressed so that the mythicists have their satisfaction with Derek expressing the reality of what I really think and why, because there's a conspiracy out there that I came to historicism because I just want to get all these interviews with scholars, and scholars have zero tolerance for mythicism. That isn't true either. I was a mythicist interviewing many of these scholars. I did not wear mythicism on my chest and said, I did not believe in Jesus. Will you interview with me? No. But I want them to know why I land on thinking there could be a guy. And I think that's more probable. But I don't know that. And I'm open to evidence, whatever that takes me. But it's kind of weird that I saw the phenomenon of fundamentalism outside of Christianity in a different way. You can be confident and think there probably wasn't a guy, but I get people who say there never was a Jesus, there never was a Muhammad. And they repeat the same phrase in all my live streams, even recently. And I see it. It's like I don't want to say mental illness, but it's like something's up. Something is up that makes them so dogmatic and not like the actual academic mythicist like Richard Carrier, who says, well, he thinks the probability is in favor that there wasn't a guy. He has a 1 in 3 chance there was. I mean, that's 33% chance, he says, that there was a Jesus, you know?
So then, do you find that passionate mythicists are frequently former believers?
Yeah, most of them. Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's someone should do like a case study on this. I cannot imagine there's not something psychological, right, that goes on with it. Not all, though. Not all. But I think most, yeah, I would imagine. And that's not to pigeonhole them or poison the well as if like, all mythicism as an idea is only a reactionary fundamentalist reaction where the chip's on the fundamentalist shoulder and therefore the idea should be discarded. You can go back to famous historical figures like Bruno Bauer and others that were like bona fide academic, legit. These guys like really smart. Were historically known as mythicists, and there's a long history of scholarship in the 19th century. You can go back to 18th century, probably even earlier than that to some people, but there was a common, it was pretty popular of an idea at one point, even in the early 20th century. And then I think once you get the Dead Sea Scrolls and Nag Hammadi texts and different things, I think there started to be a shift when some of this evidence pointed that a lot of these ideas are actually Jewish, that Jews had some of this stuff already. You don't have to look to Greco-Roman pagan parallels for all of it. And it's unfortunate that the pendulum swung so hard that there is an axe to grind. I feel, or at least you would be looked down upon in the academic arena if you were a mythicist right now. Because I know 2 PhDs who they don't teach in a setting of like at an actual college setting, but they are PhDs, experts in the field, and they are clearly considered conspiracy type in the sense that their ideas are not to be taken seriously. You know what I mean?
That's unfortunate because I feel I'm in favor of conspiracy theorists, because you're not going to uncover any conspiracies unless there is a theorist of them. So if you wait until you've got solid evidence, who was getting that evidence? It was the crazy people on the outside. So let the crazy people go. They probably don't have anything, but in the cases they do, again, I want 8 billion experiments to be run with 8 billion different people. And it's like, if that's the thing, then go for it.
Yeah, it's tough. It gets tougher because then like Richard Carrier, he can be pretty tough on his opponents. Okay. And he's also being attacked from every side too. So there's a sense in which it's hard. It's hard because it's like, he can be pretty ugly toward people in his blogs. They don't like that. They don't like how cutthroat and brazen he can be, and then yet at the same time he's also being every angle being critiqued from people when they do engage his work. A lot of them just avoid his work, and I think he's shadow banned, I think, by a lot of academics in the actual world of academia that gets peer reviewed all the time, he's become kind of pariah in their view, I think, at this point. It sucks because it's those ideas that he postulates, even if you find out you don't agree with him at the end of the day, that help sharpen your own thinking. And it's my opponents that have given me the greatest internal critique that allows me to really go, you know what? If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have spent 3 years reading these books and actually have come to a conclusion where I think I'm stronger in the position I held to, because if it weren't for your calling me out here in these spots, there's that. But then there's also the chance that my opponents were right about aspects of that, and so it helps me upgrade what I thought beforehand. And all of it is an improvement, I think, a betterment towards really trying to ascertain what the case is,
I feel like this is true across disciplines.
Yeah.
Like in every case, like flat earthers, like go for it. Like, because worst case scenario, you're gonna be like, well, but how do you explain this? Like, this proves a flat earth. I'll be like, actually, that is pretty good evidence. I never really thought about that. And then I'll go find the answer for it. Like, oh, that explains it.
Yeah.
I just learned something. Thanks. Like, if you hadn't been a flat earther and brought that up to me, then I wouldn't have learned this cool little thing that now I have, all thanks to you. Because I wouldn't have thought to have that question unless you start with the perspective of maybe the earth is flat. You don't ever come up with that question. You never get that answer. So I feel like it's all valuable. And I don't want to be one of the flat earthers. I want to believe true things and all false things. But also, I don't see the benefit in getting rid of them except for the satisfaction of knowing that they're stupid and I'm smart.
Well, I agree with you. The only thing I would contend there is that when you get to science, specifically Earth, being a globe or a scientific hypothesis, it's a harder science. These fields are more empirically based, that are capable to be understood better. When you get into language and ancient text, you enter into a subjective world, because language is already a negotiation with a cultural arena you have to enter. And we're talking about 2,000 years removed, and we're talking about a period where superstitions are run rampant, and you're talking about, like, even if you took the mythicist out of the picture, the historicists don't even agree on what kind of Jesus existed. They don't know if he was a rebel, violent zealot, whether he was a protester, a nonviolent protester, whether he was a cynic philosopher type, whether he was an apocalyptic preacher, whether he was just a wise person with sayings. There are so many kinds of Jesuses that are seriously contended amongst the actual academics, apart from the mythicists. And then you have the model of mythicism that comes in, that says that Paul's letters are the earliest. And what do we see? We see a guy who's having conversations with a guy named Jesus in his mind that he thinks is the Christ. He's a cosmic demiurge figure that is a divine being, that is an angel, and that he has this relationship with, and that's our earliest evidence of Christianity. So they postulate any influence thereafter is likely Pauline, and therefore, you got to rationalize why the earliest cosmic angelic Jesus became a man in the Gospels on earth, being crucified by Romans, and all the biographic details that are absent from the early Pauline letters. So now you have to rationalize all this, and you have to make sense of it. And that model makes some sense when you think through it the way they're trying to make you think through it, even though there's things I can't buy for me, as if he's in the third heaven, and then one will jump to Hebrews and they go, well, look at Hebrews. He's at the altar in heaven and he's pouring his blood out there. And, all of these little details that they'll say, well, that proves that he's in outer space and that his sacrifice was always in outer space. And I sit here and I'm like, okay, I get it. I see what you're doing. I see what you're saying. So then they have a different explanation of how you deal with the Gospels and why he's on earth. Oh, you humorized a celestial being and made him historical decades after Paul wrote his letters. So the Gospels are written in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s, 110, 120, 130. You can go late. I have scholars that go way, 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 way late for some of these. And what do you do, man? What do you do when you have these models that are all like hypothetical, it's not the same as I think empirical evidence that we can actually do in the sciences, such as the Earth's globe, which is why I would say if you're going to talk about flat Earth in schools and educate kids, do so by debunking it using the actual science, but not like, hey, we're going to have a class devoted to flat Earth to show you why this is like a real like runner-up as a hypothesis for the actual Earth. It's not a model. Like mythicists would feel disrespected that you immediately went like unconsciously to flat Earth.
Yeah,
you see what
fair.
I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm so used to being disrespected myself that
But you understand now, like
yeah, right. Well, and same thing happens with Santa. Every time I bring up Santa, like I just mean it as an analogy. But yes, I understand that. That's yeah. No, I don't mean to say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and honestly though, see, I want to defend the flat earthers again. Like I feel like the fact that you as a mythicist, not you, but whoever the mythicist is like, I'm not an idiot like a flat earther. Like, how dare you?
Yeah.
Like, you get into the flat earth community and they're like, well, at least we don't believe that like Jesus never lived or something stupid like that. Like, obviously he lived. Like, don't put me in the same containers. I'm like that whole thing, that whole like thing of disrespect of like, I'm not an idiot like those guys. Like, no, I am. I somewhere in my life that I'm not aware of right now, I'm an idiot, just like name the idiot group. And the fun of life, one of the great joys of life is being able to discover those things and have it to be able to go, oh, really? The earth is round? Oh, and everybody else already knows the earth is round. Okay. Well, I guess I learned something. And I feel like that's the courageous move.
Yeah.
That's the move that I really want to reward in humanity is you are not tied to your past self. You're not tied to your past ideas. You get to change your mind and to upgrade your thoughts or downgrade your thoughts. Maybe you're like, actually, flat earth, that sounds really interesting. You're allowed to do that. And you're allowed to run that experiment. So, yeah. I mean, part of me, like, I'm sorry, mythicists, I didn't mean to insult you that way. And also, how dare you?
Exactly. No, and that's why I wanted you to hear that, though, just so you understood. You immediately picked up on it, but Bart Ehrman was asked publicly one time where he was like, what do you think about mythicism or like, did Jesus exist and all, which is why he was motivated to write his book called Did Jesus Exist? And most mythicists you'll run into will say it's the worst book he ever wrote, right? Of course, the mythicists will say it, but they might have a point, and I don't know. I mean, I need to really critically evaluate it if it is. But he, in a video recording that gets circulated even to this day, equates them with flat Earth. Okay? So once Bart Ehrman, because he's the most popular New Testament scholar on planet Earth, literally, and that's a fact in terms of just overall reputation. I think the runner-up Bible scholar right now is Dan McClellan, is, saying your hypothesis is flat Earth. And then when he writes the book, he conflates, versions of mythicism that aren't your version, and they're not the academic version. So when he's attacking mythicism in his book, he's often hitting the more conspiracy internet level versions of it and not like a peer-reviewed version that maybe thoroughly was thought out and like tried its best to give you a hypothesis that is peer-reviewed, that is proposing the idea that Jesus may not have existed. I think that's important that we don't call mythicists flat earthers, especially when I've been in those circles and thought through these questions very deeply and realized why mythicists think the way they do. But it only creates more division. And so my upcoming, if I'm going to be really honest, script on this issue is actually trying to give you a stillman on both sides, why I'm like 60-40, thinking there was probably a dude. Don't know that. Maybe some days I'm 50-50. Maybe some days I'm 70-30. It just depends. It's not like a fixed number that I have all calculated out into a calculator and I know on all of the examples that are in the New Testament as if I could do that. But I want to do a video to really get people to see that question that everyone's so holy shit about, like, whoa, it's fizzled out in terms of its holy crap significance, even though I do find it kind of interesting occasionally. Because the real matter to me that we're never going to know is that question. I don't think we'll ever know that. Maybe we do. Maybe we find Jesus because then that's a way to falsify it. We found the guy, okay? And there are people who think that they may have potentially discovered the tomb, the family tomb of Jesus, and who knows, they may actually have Jesus's bones. Okay, the Talpiot tomb. If you haven't looked into it, it's worth looking into. Okay, if that's true that we found Jesus's family tomb and that Jesus was in there, it's over. There was a guy. So, what do we do then? We get away from mythicism. The mythicist would still go, even if that were true. The narratives, what we're looking at, that character is constructed by an author who is making it up. Okay, and I would agree that they're making it up. Now, then the debate can become, are there any clues in there that did happen? Or is there anything that really does go back to the guy? I don't know if you'll be able to even know that, even if there are. That's the problem we're dealing with. You got a guy running around in Galilee at synagogue to synagogue who would jump from place to place that we don't have any external sources for. You have internal writings and highly legendary material. Like good luck. It would take a god to try and figure that out, or actual evidence, which we do not have, in order to solve that riddle. And I think they have more in common than they don't. But, what do you do when there's a beef between those who think there was probably a dude and those who think there probably wasn't, when oftentimes those who think there probably wasn't think if you grant there was a dude, you're giving all this leeway to the fundamentalists who are going to use this as a weapon. And they do. They use Bart Ehrman as a weapon. And then those minimal mythicists or historicists that think there was probably a dude, but none of the magic Jesus was real, they're looking at the mythicists who are dogmatic online, who have that confidence like the fundamentalists, and they go, dude, you've lost it. You've gone way too far. You're like not even open to there have been a Jesus. Like you're so fighting against something, it almost becomes an identity, it seems, for some. And that's the issue.
Absolutely. The stories that we tell ourselves are our identities. I don't know what we are without them. Like you wake up without your stories, without your memories, you are nothing. You don't exist anymore. We call that brain dead. So from my perspective, like back to your example of the dad that saves the babies and the mom and stuff. Like those babies aren't going to remember dad, and so their stories are whatever mom tells them. And he might have been an abusive alcoholic, whatever. Her story is your dad was the greatest guy in the world. And he treated me like a queen. And he was the best dad ever. He was a war hero. And they go tell their friends, my dad, and they're like, how are we ever going to know? How are we ever going to know? Like we've got a story from someone who needed to believe something in the moment. Yeah. And so great. Like I feel like, well, cool. Then who cares what he actually was? I'm still going to hold up that legend as a hero. That guy, I want to be like that guy. Yeah. Not the guy that was alive. He was a terrible brute. But the guy that she created, I want to be a man just like him. He's awesome. I don't need him to actually exist in order to aspire to be like him.
There are mythicists who do believe, by the way. There was a Catholic or I think he was a Catholic priest. I can't remember his name, but he got in big trouble with the Catholic Church, who wrote that he didn't think Jesus existed. And yet the story about the character, like you said, still resonated.
So then I can't imagine anyone who's put more energy into this topic than you have. And I have just barely scraped the surface. I am curious, though, from an expert, is there anything actually unique about Jesus' story? Is there any sentence you can point to that like Jesus did this and no one else in history did this thing?
Let's check what he isn't unique on, and then we'll go from there. I feel like that we can start checking off the boxes and going, okay, his birth isn't unique in the sense that many demigods had births. We clearly know these things. These are like the easy ones, right? Resurrection's not unique. We have several stories and tales of different figures who resurrected or even had apotheosis. So they then became deified in heaven and whatnot, so resurrection's not unique. The 3-day motif of resurrection isn't unique to even Jewish ideas. With Jonah, 3 days in the well, well, you have Inanna, 2,500 years before, 2,000 years before Jesus, who died and then literally resurrects 3 days later. So 3-day motif's not unique. You have rabbis all around this time teaching in parables. You have rabbis that are teaching on similar teachings that Jesus had, like Hillel. That were very much softening of the law, arguments that you might say he's arguing against Torah enforcers, people who are trying to be strict and very strict about how to observe the Torah. And he's much more relaxed, more liberal about his teachings about Torah. Jesus may have taught similar to Hillel. So even if there was a historical dude, it's not unique in that regard. There were other Jewish rabbis teaching like that. And a lot of the aspects of the cult from the 12 followers and everything, you find this in the Qumran community. Him being a young kid prodigy who had all this wisdom and that older people were listening to him as a child is not unique to Jesus. You might even look to biblical stories that you could see that Jesus' story is rifting off of, whether it be Moses, David, Joseph, even the Son of Man you see in Daniel. There's so much. Elijah, Elisha, the miracle of spreading the food as a miracle, that Elijah already did. It was 100 people, not 5,000. But then you have 5,000 in Homer. So I'm going through all these miracle tales and thinking, what's unique? Calming the storm isn't unique for a demigod or a god figure that is able to calm the storms. So what would be unique? I mean, the way every story is told is different to the T, but one might go, well, Jesus is showing compassion to his enemies. That's unique that he would show compassion to those who are his enemies. And I'm not even sure that the philosophy of selflessness and pacifistic ideas is unique to Jesus.
Not at all.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So everything's unique and everything isn't, because every story is not identical in their details, but there's so much commonality that happens within these narratives. It's hard for me to know, like, is there a single episode that I can look to and say that there's no example in any other stories that I can think of from any other character that Jesus does in the Gospels that is nowhere else to be found? Nothing even remotely like it. I don't know if that's true, but I'll tell you this. There is something that I do take away from Christianity that I think is important. And it's a philosophy I try to live, and that is showing forgiveness and trying to give people chances, because we're going to make mistakes. There's almost a gullibility when you grant that philosophy, though, that can be taken advantage of. And I don't want to be someone who goes, you messed up and you did me wrong, and there's no chance. Christianity's given me a philosophy that grants people chances. But when you read early, like people like Lucian of Samosata, who writes about this guy named Peregrinus and how he duped a bunch of Christians because they were so gullible and they were quick to believe what he had to say and forgive really quickly. When he was in prison, they knew he was innocent. He's in prison for something he did wrong. The Christians believed his innocence. You see, so the gullibility comes when you grant that kind of philosophy. And I think that philosophy resonates because I've changed. I've had a past. And so you risk it. You risk it with these philosophies, but that mercy that comes with these ideas, I think, is good. You might ask that, are there unique things that Christians did that were different from the rest of the cults out there? And I think there were, they mainstreamed things that were already known in other philosophies with Stoics and Platonists and stuff. They mainstreamed it and made it like the philosophy, I don't want to say for dummies as if I'm trying to be a pejorative here, but I'm saying like Stoics and, Epicureans and Platonists were very smart philosophers. And then you have the average folk. Well, this was a milked down way for that philosophy to be taught to a mass audience. And through Christianity, I think a lot of that philosophy was then filtered to a much broader audience when most may not have studied Plato, right? Well, now you have a way in which they're now receiving a form of it underneath this Christian message. And so they were adopting children instead of infanticide on levels that you didn't maybe see as common amongst many other thinkers, even though there were groups that did adopt children when they would say, no, that child has disabilities, leave it out for exposure, which is the common practice, or let it die. Don't let that child live and suffer its life, crippled in an ancient world where they didn't have the infrastructure we do today for handicapped and people with disabilities and stuff like that. Well, Christianity would have adopted. Often Christians would adopt those children and try to take care of them and raise them because they had a more caring aspect of these things about life and whatnot. So that could be arguably something unique, but we also gradually evolved with ethics and these debates happening between Stoics, Epicureans, Middle Platonists, you name it. Like, there's a debate and there's a wrestling of how to become more ethical and how to outdo your neighbor who has a different philosophy. And so Christianity, yeah, things come with Christianity. Eventually we get science. And of course, Christians want to say, we gave you that. And it's like, what do you do with the pre-Socratics? Like, they were already trying to grapple these scientific questions back then.
I think that was so that we talk about, the hills and valleys and stuff, like realizing that there had been lots of other people that had the same exact story as Jesus was
I
a
would say
revelation of
same
like,
exact.
well, no, but that's the hill. And
Yeah.
then the valley is, they weren't the same exact one.
Yeah.
And then where I got dumped out of the machine was, okay, but I was told Jesus was unique. There was no one else in history born to a virgin. There was no one else who
Right.
did these miracles. They're like, Jesus is one of a kind. And even though I don't believe this anymore, I still can't get myself back to where I was before, that he was unique in some way. He's just kind of a unique combination of prior stories.
Or even just common tropes. So one doesn't need to argue that there's a direct genetic, connection between an earlier story and Jesus. All one needs to know is how to write a legend at the time. And these authors would have known stories like that and understood common tropes like that. And then they just write up a Jesus form like that. Some scholars go as far as to say there's a genetic connection. And the author of Matthew, may have imitated the Alexander the Great birth narrative for Jesus, to where Alexander the Great's dad and mom, literally a virgin scenario, right? Where she's not supposed to be having sex and whatnot. And then this god, Apollo, impregnates her instead of the mortal father. And yeah, so you get scholars who do that, and then you have scholars who go, I think it's just generic. It's in the air for authors who write this way to craft narratives like this and construct it. And I like both sides. But when you get into the first online internet zeitgeist mythicist stuff, what they do is they go, Jesus, all you do is just change the name and a few details, and it's identical. 12 disciples, December 25th, born of a virgin, crucified, resurrected 3 days later. And they say, that's what happened to Horus. And then you're like, well, hold on. Reading the primary sources, I do not see any evidence that exact thing is what happened with Horus. Now, there is text in Plutarch that indicate that Horus, and he has Harpocrates is the name, Horus in Plutarch, is born around the winter solstice. Okay, so there is this idea that Horus is born around this period. But bro, you got to get really careful, and you don't want to just generalize. The closer you get, the more you realize damn, it is not just so simplified. And so it's a complicated mess, and there's a debate, and there's scholars arguing it. And I like that. I like that mess. It's a distraction. It's like what you described in your deconversion story with me as you went through all this. When you went through your existential crisis, what you needed to know, I need to be distracted for 10 seconds by this, 30 seconds by that, just to get to 10 p.m. Well, life is like that. Even though we're not living in a crisis moment, life is kind of a crisis. And this is something that I am fascinated with. There's competitiveness in it, in the sense that you can somehow figure something out that others don't know. There's a distraction on figuring out and unraveling the magic trick that you used to have played in front of your eyes for 20 years of your life, 25 years of your life. And then one day someone in the auditorium goes, psst, hey, and you're in there in the magic show and you're like, yeah, what's up? Hold on, the trick's about to happen. And they're like, do you want to know how the trick really happens? And I'm like, I'm a little scared. It's an eerie character. He's not part of my crowd. He's over there in the corner. David Blaine's on stage. Christianity is David Blaine in this analogy. And he's saying, look, I will show you some shit, okay? If you want to see it. And part of me is afraid because I know they're not one of us in the auditorium crowd watching and believing in the magic. And I'm going, I'm actually, if I'm being honest with you, I'm a little scared. Is it going to ruin the magic for me? And he goes, no, it's going to increase the excitement and interest that you had about it. Now you know how the magic trick happens. It's going to open a whole nother world of different magicians, of different tricks. A whole different adventure will take place once you do explore this. That's the analogy I would give on what happened to me, man. And it did open up a whole nother world and a freedom from the guilt and shame that did come with doctrines that I believed from David Blaine on the stage.
Yeah, well, and not to get all Jordan Peterson on you, but that is the story of Adam and Eve. Like, hey, psst, the guy's lying to you.
Yeah, and he was.
Yeah, well, yeah, yes.
I do think that interpretation makes the best sense. I know there are different ones, but I do believe God did lie to them. And that Satan told, or that they call it Satan, but really the snake, it's just a snake, the Nakash, told the truth. That their eyes would be opened and they would become like the gods, knowing good and evil. And God knew that. So he told them a lie like a parent would tell a child, don't eat from the cookie jar, they're poison. Or, something to keep you from doing the thing that's going to keep you leaving your innocence. And I think that's the reason that story is there. In the original context, I believe that the Hebrew Bible is conveying God told a lie, specifically the Garden of Eden story. The serpent told the truth on what would happen, but through the disobedience, God ended up having to kick them, and, we see what happened. But there are some people who try to go, no, God didn't lie, and they did die that day, but it was spiritual death, and there's always ways to rationalize it. But
well, I feel that that's the first one is a more comfortable reading, frankly, because if lying was the worst thing that God did in the Old Testament, like, he would be a much better guy. Like, the lie is easy for me to get over with. Like, yeah, of course you lie to the kids. They're dumb humans. What do they know?
Yeah.
But yeah, the insistence on, again, univocality throughout the Bible is like, well, I need that guy. I need that God to be the same as this God over here. Like, good luck with that. You're going to end up with some weird Genesis stuff there. But
exactly.
Anyway. Well, Derek, thank you so much for joining me and enlightening us all.
Absolutely. Look, anytime, man. I love these conversations and really appreciate you, man.
Thank you all for joining me. If you're not already subscribed to Derek Lambert's MythVision podcast channel, you can remedy that right now. He regularly features the world's top historians and scholars in theology and religion and the Bible. So while I do admire his Rolodex, more importantly, I've found him to be a thoroughly kind and generous person, capable of disagreeing respectfully while staying authentic and honest. These are qualities our world needs desperately, so I'm rooting for him, and I'm rooting for you, and I think you should too.